I still listen to the tapes sometimes, not because I want to, because I need to remember that I did not imagine any of it. What you are about to hear is compiled from recordings, dispatch logs, search and rescue communications, and written accounts gathered over the course of 18 months in Hemlock Hollow, West Virginia. This is not a single incident. This is a pattern. And patterns, once you see them, become impossible to unsee. The recordings were found in a ranger station storage room during a routine inventory. The logs were discovered in filing cabinets that had been marked inactive. Some of the testimony came directly from people who lived through the events and were willing to speak, though many have since refused to discuss it. The official explanation for what happened in Hemlock Hollow is documented, filed, and closed. But the recordings tell a different story. This is what we found. The first tape begins on a Tuesday evening in late September, almost 2 years ago. The voice belongs to Dale Harrison, a park ranger with 17 years of service in the Hemlock Hollow National Forest. Dale was 42 years old. He had 2 daughters, both in college. He had a wife named Margaret who worried about his night shifts, though she had learned not to say so. On the tape, his voice is calm, professional, the voice of someone doing a routine job in a place he knew better than most. Evening Ranger Log, Tuesday, September 23rd. Temperature dropping to 46 degrees by 10 p.m. No precipitation forecast. Parking area C, secured at 1700 hours. All trails marked and clear. 1 vehicle reported abandoned near mile marker 4 on Ridge Road. Vehicle identified as blue 1998 Ford Ranger. No plates visible. Engine still running. Driver's side door open. No occupant present. Contact made with dispatch at 17:15. Standing by for instruction. There is a pause on the tape. Approximately 20 seconds of silence. Just the sound of wind through hemlocks and the ambient hum of a 2-way radio. Then Dale's voice again, quieter now. Vehicle is a newer abandonment. Paint is wet, still has heat coming from the engine. Driver cannot have left more than 30 minutes before I arrived. There is a coffee cup on the passenger seat. Still steaming. Another pause. I am going to run the plates. The next recording comes from the county dispatch center, 15 minutes later. The dispatcher's name was Susan Cole. She had worked dispatch for 12 years. The transcript reads like this: Susan, Dale, we have a match on that plate. Vehicle registered to Thomas Hendricks. Address in town. 34 years old. No outstanding warrants. Nothing unusual, Dale. Has Thomas Hendricks called in to report a breakdown? Susan, negative. No emergency calls from that number in the last 4 hours. Dale, the truck is not broken down. The engine temperature gauge is normal. Oil is fine. There is nothing mechanically wrong with this vehicle. Susan, you are suggesting voluntary abandonment? Dale, I am suggesting that the driver left this vehicle intentionally, Susan, and recently. There is a sound on the tape then. It is difficult to identify. The audio quality is not excellent, but it sounds like Dale moving through brush. Footsteps on gravel. Dale, there are footprints here. Fresh. I am going to follow them. Susan, Dale, that is not protocol. Wait for additional units. Dale, Susan, I need to know if a person is in distress on this mountain. The footprints lead up the access road toward the North Ridge. I am staying in radio contact. My GPS is on. I can see my position marker. Susan, Dale. The sound of the radio cuts out. Not static, but a complete loss of signal. The tape runs for approximately 30 seconds more. There is no sound at all, except wind. Then Susan's voice comes through again, and you can hear something different in her tone now. Something sharp underneath the professional calm. Susan, Dale, respond. Dale, I am not getting a signal. Dale, there is nothing but wind. The official report filed that night states that Dale Harrison became separated from radio contact at 17:38 hours while investigating an abandoned vehicle on Ridge Road. The footprints he was following led up into the forest, where the terrain becomes rough and uneven. Radio contact was re-established 8 minutes later at 17:46. Dale reported that he had lost signal in a low area between ridges, a common problem in that part of the county. He did not locate the owner of the vehicle. He secured the scene and returned to his vehicle to wait for additional units. Thomas Hendricks was found 2 days later, nearly 2 miles up the mountain from where his truck was discovered. He was sitting at the base of a hemlock tree. He was alive, but he was in severe shock. He did not speak coherently for almost 18 hours. When he finally gave an account, he told investigators that he remembered leaving his truck to look at the view. He remembered walking up the access road. After that, he said, there was a gap in his memory. He could not explain how he had gone so far up the mountain or how many hours had passed. He was certain, he said, that only 10 or 15 minutes had elapsed. The official explanation was that Thomas Hendricks had suffered a dissociative episode, possibly drug-induced, though his blood work showed no narcotics or alcohol. He did not pursue the matter further. He moved out of Hemlock Hollow the following month. But the recordings continued. The next documented case occurred 42 days later. The date was November 3rd. The person was a hiker named Sarah Mitchell, 27 years old, who had been on the trails near Hemlock Hollow for a weekend excursion. According to her hiking partner, Marcus Webb, Sarah had felt unwell in the afternoon and decided to rest at a shelter while Marcus continued on the trail to photograph wildlife. The shelter was located at Bear Crest, a popular intermediate hiking spot. Marcus returned 40 minutes later. Sarah was not at the shelter. Her backpack was there. Her phone was there. Her shoes were sitting neatly on the bench beside her backpack, but Sarah was gone. The recording that documented this comes from the search and rescue coordinator, a woman named Janet Reeves, who had coordinated over 100 missing person searches. Her voice on the tape is controlled, but carries an edge of something. Confusion, possibly fear. Janet, subject Sarah Mitchell, last seen at Bear Crest Shelter at approximately 13:45 hours. Witness reports subject was resting due to illness. Upon return 40 minutes later, subject was no longer present. Personal effects were left behind. No signs of struggle, no apparent distress. Searchers have fanned out in a 2-mile grid pattern. Dogs have been brought in. Conditions are clear, but temperature is dropping. The tape continues for several minutes with radio chatter from searchers reporting their positions. The overall tone is that of a routine missing person search. The weather is good. The terrain is known. Sarah is young and healthy. The assumption, at that point, was that she had become disoriented, possibly due to her illness, and had wandered off the trail. She would likely be found within hours, but Sarah Mitchell was not found within hours. The search continued through the night. By the following morning, additional resources were brought in. Search dogs worked the area thoroughly. They picked up Sarah's scent leaving the shelter area, and the dogs tracked it for approximately 300 yards up a slope. Then the scent trail stopped completely. The dogs would not move beyond that point. They became agitated and refused to track further, despite being encouraged by their handlers. Helicopters were dispatched. The area was searched from above. Volunteers combed through every ravine, every thicket, every possible place a person could be sheltering or hiding. After 48 hours of intensive search, the decision was made to scale back operations. Sarah had vanished. The official report documented it as a missing person case. No foul play was indicated, no suspect was identified. The assumption, made quietly, was that Sarah had taken her own life, possibly due to an undiagnosed mental health crisis, and her body was simply not recoverable in that terrain. The wilderness keeps its dead. Her family did not accept that explanation. But there was nothing more to investigate. A tape was discovered, though, labeled with the date November 4th. The voice is that of Dale Harrison again. He is no longer on duty. This is a personal recording made on his personal digital recorder, the kind that rangers sometimes carried to document trail conditions or wildlife observations. The background noise suggests he is alone, somewhere remote, likely still in the Hemlock Hollow forest. The timestamp on the tape indicates it was made at 3:37 in the morning. Dale, I am making this recording for my own record, not for official documentation. What I am about to describe is not included in my report to search coordination. I cannot include it in my report because I have no explanation for what I observed, and no explanation means no credibility, and no credibility means they stop listening to anything I say. He pauses. There is the sound of him settling down, sitting on something, gravel or stone. Dale, during the night's search for Sarah Mitchell, I was assigned to Grid Sector 7, which covered the north slope above the shelter. I was working in the dark with a flashlight. The terrain there is steep and heavily vegetated with rhododendron and mountain laurel. Very slow going. At approximately 2300 hours, I encountered something unusual. Another pause. Longer this time. When Dale speaks again, his voice is different, quieter, more careful. Dale, there was a sound. I cannot adequately describe it. Not an animal sound, not a human sound. It was a kind of clicking, repetitive and rhythmic, like someone tapping wood against stone. It was coming from deeper up the slope, away from the trail. I followed the sound for approximately 200 yards. I should not have left my sector. I should have reported it to Susan on dispatch. I did not. The sound of wind picks up on the tape. Or perhaps it is Dale moving through brush. Dale, I found a small clearing. The trees there were hemlock, very old and very tall. The clicking sound was louder, and then I saw something. There was a pale shape on the ground. It looked like fabric, like clothing. I turned my flashlight on it, and I saw what I thought was Sarah Mitchell's fleece jacket. There is a change in Dale's breathing on the tape. He is speaking more slowly now. Dale, but Sarah was wearing a red jacket. I know that from the missing person report. The jacket I saw was green, and it was not recent. The fabric was old, very old, and the sleeves were pinned down. He stops talking. The tape runs with just the sound of wind and the ambient forest for nearly 30 seconds. Dale, pinned down as if to prevent movement. I did not approach the garment. I looked around the clearing with my flashlight. There were others, at least 6 that I could see. Jackets, shirts, clothing, all arranged on the ground in a pattern, all old, all pinned down. And in the center of this arrangement, there was a structure made of wood and what looked like bone. The clicking sound was coming from it. The wind was moving through it, creating the sound. And Sarah Mitchell's red jacket was hanging from the highest point. The tape ends abruptly after that, not edited. It simply stops, as if Dale turned off the recorder in the middle of speaking. No such clearing was reported in the search documentation. No such arrangement of clothing was found. When Dale was questioned informally about what he had observed during the search, he reported that he had tracked the sound to its source and found it to be a dead tree moving in the wind, its branches hitting a stone outcropping. He found no evidence of Sarah Mitchell. The official search report was filed the following day. Sarah Mitchell's case was reclassified as a cold case. Her family made media appeals. Vigils were held in town. Eventually, the case faded from public attention, but the recordings continued. Over the next 14 months, 7 more people would go missing in the vicinity of Hemlock Hollow National Forest. Each case had unique circumstances. Each had an official explanation. A hiker who became disoriented and was believed to have drowned in one of the mountain streams, though her body was never recovered. A man who went hunting and simply did not return, presumed to have had an accident or possibly suicide. A park maintenance worker who called in sick one day and was never heard from again. 2 teenagers who disappeared while camping, likely runaways. An elderly man with early-stage Alzheimer's who walked away from his home in the foothills. A woman whose car was found abandoned on a rural road, gas tank full, engine still running, door open, no sign of the driver. 9 disappearances in 18 months in a forest that receives moderate use but is not particularly more dangerous than any other Appalachian wilderness area. What connected them, though, were the recordings. Dale Harrison made recordings of almost every incident, not official reports, personal documentation. The tapes show a pattern that does not appear in any official file, a pattern that, once you hear it, reshapes everything you understand about what was happening in Hemlock Hollow. One tape, dated December 19th, documents what Dale experienced while investigating a disturbance call in the residential area bordering the forest. A resident had reported hearing strange sounds coming from the woods behind her house. When Dale arrived to investigate, he encountered nothing at first. But as he walked the perimeter between the residential area and the forest edge, he began to notice something. On the tape, his voice is very calm, professional, but underneath, you can hear something has shifted in him. Dale, the boundary is very clear if you know what you are looking for. On the residential side, there are signs of human habitation. Fences, though old, cleared brush, cut trees. On the forest side, everything is different. There is a kind of order to it, an arrangement. The way the trees stand, the way the ground is clear of debris. He pauses. Dale, it looks like something has been cultivating this, deliberately maintaining this border. The clearing is too precise. The arrangement is too intentional. This is not a natural edge. There is then a sound on the tape that is difficult to identify. It could be Dale moving through vegetation, or it could be something else. Something that sounds almost like breathing, but not quite. Dale, I can see them now. I did not want to believe this, but I can see them now. The clothing. It is everywhere along this edge. Pieces of it woven into the lower branches. There is a pattern here, a very specific pattern, like a boundary marker, like something is marking its territory. The recording ends abruptly after that. The official report for that call simply states that Dale investigated the noise disturbance and found no evidence of a threat. The sound was likely wildlife. The case was closed. But over the following weeks and months, other rangers began making similar observations. Subtle things. Clothing found in unusual places. Arrangements of objects along trail intersections. The way certain areas seemed to repel search dogs. The way radio contact would fail at specific locations. The way people would lose time in particular parts of the forest, arriving at their destination hours later than their travel time should have allowed. No ranger was willing to officially report these things. They were variations of normal, easily explained by individual factors: weather, equipment malfunction, human error. But the recording suggests something different. In January of the second year, another tape was discovered. This one is different from the others. This one was made by a hiker named Robert Chen, a 49-year-old software engineer from out of state who was visiting the area to do some winter photography. His camera was found on a trail near Rattlesnake Ridge. The camera contained photographs of the surrounding forest, some very good images of winter landscape and ice formations. But on his personal digital recorder, which was found near the camera, was this message. Robert's voice on the tape is terrified. Not theatrical, not exaggerated, but genuinely afraid. Robert, I do not know if anyone will hear this. I am leaving this because I do not think I am going to leave this forest alive. My name is Robert Chen. I am recording this on January 15th at approximately 1400 hours. I am lost. I was taking photographs along the trail toward Rattlesnake Ridge, and I became disoriented. The sun went behind the clouds. I could not determine direction. I started walking what I thought was back toward the main trail, but the forest started looking different. The trees looked the same, but the arrangement was different. Like I was walking in circles, but the circle was getting smaller. There's heavy breathing on the tape. Robert is clearly agitated, trying to control his fear. Robert, I have been walking for what I think is about 30 minutes, but my phone says 3 hours have passed. That is impossible. 30 minutes of walking, but 3 hours of time. I walked in what felt like a small area, maybe a quarter mile, and 3 hours disappeared. A sound interrupts him. It is distant, but clear on the tape, a kind of clicking, rhythmic and deliberate. Robert, that sound. I heard that sound before. There is a place in the forest where that sound is always present. The locals will not talk about it, but there is a place where the sound never stops. The clicking, the tapping. People talk about it in quiet voices in the bars in town. They call it the hollowing. They say people used to disappear there, and then it stopped for a long time, and now it has started again. His breathing is faster now. Robert, I did not believe that. I thought it was folklore, the kind of story people tell about remote places, to feel a connection to something primal. But I am hearing it now. It is getting closer. The sound is moving toward me, or I am moving toward it. I cannot tell. The forest does not feel like the forest anymore. It feels like something's watching. Something is paying attention to me. There is a long pause on the tape. The background sound is just wind in trees. And underneath, very faintly, that clicking sound. Robert, I am going to leave the recorder here. If anyone finds this, if anyone hears this, I want there to be a record. The official search will find a reasonable explanation for where I am. They will say I got lost and injured, and I will be missing, and eventually they will stop looking. But I want there to be evidence that something else happened. I want there to be proof that this forest is not what people think it is. The tape ends with that. Robert Chen was found the following day, 8 miles from where his camera was discovered, completely disoriented and suffering from severe dehydration despite the cold weather. He had been missing for what rescue coordination calculated should have been approximately 3 hours. His hiking watch showed that 8 hours had elapsed. He had no explanation for the discrepancy. He was airlifted out and received medical treatment. He was briefly interviewed, but was considered an unreliable witness due to his state of confusion and dehydration. He did not return to Hemlock Hollow. He did not speak publicly about his experience, but his recording was among those found in the ranger station. By the spring of the second year, it was clear to anyone listening to the personal recordings that Dale Harrison had become obsessed with understanding what was happening in Hemlock Hollow. He was spending his off hours in the forest, making observations, marking locations, creating maps. His professional work continued normally, but his life outside of official duties was being consumed by this investigation. One tape from April shows Dale speaking with Susan Cole, the dispatcher, during what appears to be an unofficial meeting. This is not a phone conversation. They are speaking in person. The quality is poor. The audio captured on Dale's recorder as they sit somewhere outside, with wind and ambient forest sounds in the background. Susan, Dale, you are going to lose your job if you keep this up. I have heard the supervisors talking. They know you are spending time in the forest off hours. They know you are talking to people about the disappearances. They do not want this kind of attention, Dale. There have been 9 disappearances, Susan. 9. And the official reports treat each one as an isolated incident, as if there is no connection, as if the forest is simply dangerous, and sometimes people get hurt. Susan, that is what forests are. Dangerous, Dale. This is something else. You know it. I know it. Every ranger in this county knows it. The dogs will not track in certain areas. Radio signals fail at specific locations. People lose time. People disappear and are not found, or they are found in places where no one would have walked. I found Robert Chen's recording. I listened to what he said. He was not hallucinating. He was describing something real. Susan, and what exactly is that something, Dale? A monster, a ghost, an interdimensional creature. Give me a rational explanation that you can actually report to the department, and I will back you up completely. But I cannot do anything with folklore and personal recordings. There is a long silence on the tape. Dale, what if it is not an interdimensional creature? What if it is simply something that should not exist anymore? But it does. What if Hemlock Hollow is one of the places where it lives? Susan, you are going to get yourself hurt. And then everyone will use that as proof that you are wrong, that you are unstable, that your obsession cost you your judgment. Dale, I know, but someone has to document this. The recordings become increasingly sparse after that conversation. Dale continued his work as a ranger, but his personal documentation slowed. The final tape in the collection was made in late July of the second year, approximately 2 months after his conversation with Susan Cole. By this point, Dale Harrison knew it was over. He knew his employment was becoming untenable. He knew that speaking about his experiences had resulted in subtle but clear pressure from his supervisors to stop. He knew that the only thing left was to finalize his observations and prepare to leave. On the final tape, made in his house, with no forest sounds in the background, just the sound of his voice in a small, quiet room, Dale speaks directly to whoever might eventually hear this. Dale, my name is Dale Harrison. I have worked as a park ranger in Hemlock Hollow for 17 years. In the past 18 months, I have witnessed evidence of a phenomenon that defies simple explanation. I have documented 9 confirmed disappearances in the immediate area of the forest. I have found material evidence suggesting that these disappearances are not random acts of nature, but are connected to something that exists in the forest itself. He pauses, takes a breath. Dale, I am not a scientist. I do not have a degree in cryptozoology or paranormal investigation. I am a park ranger who has spent his life in these woods, and I am telling you that something is wrong here. Something is hunting. Something is marking territory. Something is cultivating an environment where people are drawn to disappear. Another pause. Dale, I do not know what it is. I do not know how long it has existed. I do not know if it can be stopped or if this is simply a place where certain things are meant to happen. But I know what I have seen and heard. I know that people are disappearing. I know that their disappearances are connected. And I know that the official explanation for these events is false. He takes a breath. His voice becomes quieter, almost intimate. Dale, to my wife, Margaret, if you ever listen to this, I need you to know that I did everything I could to understand this and to document it. I am sorry that I could not find a way to make people listen. I am sorry that my job is likely going to end over this, but I could not ignore what I saw. I could not pretend that everything was normal when clearly it was not. I had to try. Even if it cost me everything, I had to try. There is silence on the tape then, a long silence, long enough that it seems like Dale has finished. But then his voice comes back, lower and almost broken. Dale, Margaret, if I disappear, if I am one of the missing, I want you to know that it was not an accident. I want you to know that I understood the risk, and I chose to keep looking anyway. I chose to keep searching because I believed that the truth mattered more than my safety. I still believe that. Even now, even knowing what could happen, the tape ends. Dale Harrison disappeared on August 1st, the following week. He was on a scheduled patrol, routine duty, nothing unusual. He never returned to the ranger station. His vehicle was found at one of the trailheads, empty, doors locked, engine off. No sign of struggle, no note, no explanation. The official investigation lasted 3 weeks. The conclusion was that Dale Harrison had likely had an accident on the trail, possibly a fall in a remote area where he could not call for help due to lack of signal. His body was never recovered. The case was closed. Margaret Harrison was told that her husband had likely perished in the forest due to circumstances unknown. She was told that the forest does not always give up its dead. She was told that sometimes you have to learn to live with the unanswered questions. The recordings were discovered 6 months later during a routine inventory of the ranger station. They were in a storage box, in a back room, clearly abandoned or forgotten. No one is certain when they were placed there or who decided to keep them. The box was handed over to the county sheriff, who reviewed the contents and determined that they contained personal speculations and unofficial documentation, but nothing that constituted evidence of any crime or foul play. The recordings were filed as evidence from a missing person case and subsequently stored in archives. Until someone accessed them. Someone listened. Someone realized that these recordings documented something that did not fit into any official category of disappearance. These recordings suggested something systematic, something intentional, something that, if true, should change everything about how people understood Hemlock Hollow. Here is what we know. 9 people disappeared in 18 months in an area of approximately 30 square miles. 8 have never been recovered. 1 was found alive, but unable to explain his experience. The official explanation for each disappearance treats them as isolated incidents, random bad luck in a dangerous wilderness. But the recordings suggest that they are connected, that there is something in Hemlock Hollow that draws people in and does not let them leave. The clothing Dale discovered in the forest, the precise boundary markers made of human garments, the time distortions that multiple people experienced, the way search dogs refused to follow tracks beyond certain points, the clicking sound that appeared in multiple recordings, the arrangement of objects in the shape of something that might be a structure, or might be a marker, or might be something else entirely. These details do not fit into any normal explanation. The question then becomes this: what is Hemlock Hollow? Is it simply a place where geography and weather conspire to create hazardous conditions? Is it a location where psychological distress and environmental stress cause people to make poor decisions? Is it an area with geological features that create unusual electromagnetic interference that disorients electronic devices and causes time perception distortions? Or is it something older, something that has existed in that place for far longer than humans have understood or documented? Something that is cultivating that forest, marking its territory, drawing in those who venture into its domain? We do not have an answer. The recordings do not provide one, but they do provide evidence that something is happening in Hemlock Hollow that cannot be explained by the official reports and the careful categorization of isolated incidents. Margaret Harrison still lives in the area. She did not leave after her husband disappeared. She works at a local bookstore and keeps to herself. She has never spoken publicly about Dale's recordings or his obsession with the disappearances. But there are those who have seen her, late at night, hiking the trails in Hemlock Hollow, walking slowly, looking at the trees, listening. The forest still receives visitors. Hikers still use the trails. People still walk into those woods. And occasionally, some of them do not walk back out. The recordings have been preserved. They have been archived. They are part of the official record now, though most people do not know they exist. But they remain a documentation of what one man observed, what he tried to warn about, what he died trying to understand. If you are planning to visit Hemlock Hollow, the trails are well maintained and generally safe. The views are beautiful. The forest is peaceful, especially in the early morning, before other hikers arrive. There are no signs warning of danger, no official cautions about disappearances or missing persons. The forest is open to the public, and it welcomes visitors. But if you go, pay attention to the sounds, pay attention to the way the trees are arranged, pay attention to the boundary, where the forest becomes something other than a simple collection of plants and animals. Pay attention to the time. Notice if it passes the way it should. Notice if, after what feels like 30 minutes of walking, your watch shows 3 hours have gone by. And if you hear the clicking, the rhythmic tapping sound that moves through the woods like something that is thinking, something that is aware of you, something that is deciding whether you belong there or whether you should stay there forever. If you hear that sound, you should know what it means. You should know that Hemlock Hollow is still hungry. The recordings referenced in this documentary are preserved in county archives under case file reference HC2023-INT-MISSING. Public access is restricted, but available upon written request. The final disposition of Dale Harrison remains open. If you have information about any of the disappearances in Hemlock Hollow, you are encouraged to contact the county sheriff's office. No statute of limitations applies to missing persons cases. 6 months after the recordings were archived, someone began listening to them in earnest. Not a researcher, not a journalist, not anyone with an official mandate to investigate, just a person who had access to the files and who became obsessed with the questions they raised. Her name was Claire Mercer. She was a forensic genealogist who had moved to Hemlock Hollow 2 years earlier, drawn to the area because of her family history. Her grandmother had grown up in a small town in the foothills, just outside the national forest. Claire had come to the area to research her family's roots, to understand where she came from, to find the story that connected her to this place. What she found instead was Dale Harrison's recordings. Claire worked part-time at the county records office, helping people access historical documents and filing systems. It was not demanding work. It paid enough to sustain her while she pursued her genealogy research. It gave her access to files, to archives, to the kind of information that most people do not have the opportunity to examine. And it was in this capacity, while organizing cold case files, that she discovered the box containing Dale's tapes. No one had explicitly labeled them as sensitive or restricted. They were simply filed away, part of the bureaucratic process of documentation. Claire listened to them over the course of 2 weeks, during her lunch breaks and late nights at home. By the time she had heard all of them, she had made a decision. She was going to investigate. The first tape in what would become Claire's own archive is dated September 2nd, approximately 1 year after Dale Harrison disappeared. Her voice is quiet, measured, thoughtful. She is clearly speaking to herself, making a record of her intentions and her thoughts, much as Dale had done. Claire, I have listened to all of Dale Harrison's recordings. I have read the official reports on the 9 disappearances. I have reviewed the search and rescue logs. I have looked at the newspaper articles from the time, which were surprisingly minimal. Most of the disappearances did not receive significant media attention. The ones that did were framed as isolated tragedies. No connection was ever made. No pattern was ever acknowledged. She pauses. There is the sound of paper shuffling, of her moving around what sounds like a small office or study. Claire, but Dale saw the pattern. He documented it, and then he disappeared in the same manner as the others, which means either his investigation got him killed, or his investigation was correct, and the thing he was investigating killed him. Either way, he was silenced, and the official record does not reflect what actually happened. There is something very calm in her voice, not fearless, but determined. The voice of someone who has already accepted the cost of what she is about to do. Claire, I am going to find out what Dale could not, and I am going to do it by looking at what happened before. Because disappearances do not start out of nowhere. There is always a history. There is always something that came before. And if I can find the history of Hemlock Hollow, I can find the truth about what lives there. Claire's investigation began with public records, birth certificates, death certificates, census data, property records, newspaper archives. The kind of information that genealogists use to trace family histories. But Claire was not looking for a family. She was looking for a pattern of disappearances that stretched back further than 18 months. She was looking for evidence that Hemlock Hollow had been hungry for a long time. What she found was incomplete, scattered, the kind of evidence that emerges when you look at absences rather than presences, when you count the people who should be there but are not. According to the 1890 census, the town of Hemlock Hollow had a population of 324 residents. According to the 1900 census, the population was 187. A loss of 137 people in 1 decade. The official explanation, recorded in town records, was that residents had migrated west in search of opportunity, that many families had relocated to coal mining operations in other counties, that people had simply moved on. But Claire found something else in the records. Newspaper clippings, yellowed and fragile, from the Hemlock Hollow Gazette, dated throughout the 1890s. Missing child, missing father, missing woman, missing hunter. The articles were brief, almost perfunctory. A person was reported missing. A search was conducted. The person was found or was not found. If not found, the matter was dropped. One article from November 1897 mentioned that the town council had passed an ordinance restricting access to certain areas of the forest. The ordinance did not specify which areas or what the restrictions entailed. It was simply recorded and then disappeared from subsequent issues. Another article from September 1899 mentioned that a group of hunters had refused to continue a search for a missing person because they claimed the forest was unnatural and had claimed enough. The article did not elaborate. The search was abandoned. Claire found similar patterns in other decades. The early 1920s showed a spike in disappearances. The 1940s showed another. Each time, the disappearances clustered in certain years and then seemed to stop, only to resume years or decades later. It was as if something in Hemlock Hollow went through periods of hunger, periods when it was active and taking people, and periods when it was dormant or satisfied. One of her tapes documents this discovery. Claire, I have compiled data on missing persons, cases in the Hemlock Hollow area, going back to 1887. I have found 43 confirmed disappearances where the person was never recovered, 43 people who simply vanished in or near this forest over 130 years. The official records treat each one as an isolated incident. But the pattern is clear. There are periods of high activity, followed by periods of low activity. It is not random, it is cyclical. She pauses, and you can hear her breathing, hear the tension in her voice now. Claire, the current cycle began in the spring of 1999. There was a disappearance in April of that year. A hiker, young woman, never found. And then there was nothing for almost 5 years. Then in 2004, the disappearances started again. 2 in that year, 3 in 2005. Then a pause, then more. The pattern is becoming more frequent. The intervals between disappearances are getting shorter. We are in an active cycle, a hungry cycle. As Claire's investigation deepened, she began visiting the forest itself. Not on the main trails, where she might encounter other hikers, but in the early mornings and late evenings, when the forest was quiet. She was looking for the same things Dale had looked for, evidence of intentional arrangement, places where the normal rules seemed to not apply, the boundary where the forest became something other. One tape documents a particular discovery. This tape was made late in the evening, probably around 8 or 9 p.m., in what sounds like a small clearing. There is wind in the background, but also something else, a very faint clicking sound. Claire, I found something today. Not in the same location where Dale reported finding the clothing arrangement, but in a similar location, a boundary place, where the residential area ends and the forest proper begins. What I found is a structure. It is not recent. It is not a hiking shelter or a ranger structure. It is something else. Her voice is steady, but there is an underlying current of fear now. Claire, it appears to be made of bone. The framework is bone, very old, possibly animal bone, though the largest pieces are difficult to identify. The structure is woven with fabric, with what appears to be clothing, old garments, decayed, integrated into the framework. It is like a house, like a shelter, but it is not the kind of shelter that a human would build for human use. It is the kind of shelter that something might build to hold something else, or to mark a place as belonging to something else. There is a sound on the tape then, not the clicking, but a kind of scraping sound, like something being dragged. Claire, I need to leave this area. It is getting dark, and I should not be here after dark. I do not know why I am certain of this, but I am. Some places have a sense about them, a presence. This place has a very strong sense, like I am being observed. The tape ends abruptly. The structure Claire described was never officially documented. She did not report it to the Park Service or to the county. She simply observed it, recorded it, and kept it to herself, which was, perhaps, wise, because it was shortly after this discovery that people began to notice she was investigating. She received a visit at the county records office. A man named Gerald Thorne, who identified himself as working for a private consulting firm, hired to audit county record systems. He spent several hours going through the filing systems, examining how records were organized and stored. He took particular interest in the cold case files. He asked questions about what materials were in the archives and who had been accessing them recently. A tape Claire made after his visit documents this encounter. I have checked with the county manager. No audit was scheduled. No consulting firm was contracted. He gave a false name. He showed false credentials. And he was specifically interested in the missing persons files. She sounds nervous now, her earlier confidence shaken. Claire, he asked, who had been reviewing the cold cases. He asked if I had been accessing any particular files. He said it casually, like it was a routine question, but it was not routine. He was looking for me. Someone sent him to find out if I was investigating the disappearances. There is a long pause. Claire, which means someone does not want the disappearances investigated, which means there is something worth hiding, which means I was right. Dale was right, and now someone knows that I know. After that visit, Claire became more cautious. She still made recordings, but she did so only at home, in private. She still visited the forest, but she went less frequently. She still researched the disappearances, but she used resources that did not require access to the county office systems. She was, in essence, going underground, continuing her investigation while trying not to draw attention. This tactic seemed to work for several months. The fall passed. Winter arrived early that year. The forest became difficult to access in the worst weather. Claire used the time to compile her findings, to organize her research, to create a comprehensive document that laid out everything she had discovered about the disappearances and the pattern that connected them. By early January of the following year, Claire had created what she called the Hemlock Hollow Timeline, a detailed chronology of all known disappearances, organized by date, with notes on commonalities and patterns. She had also begun to research the history of the area before it became a national forest. She had found old land grants, old property records, old family histories that referenced the area. And in those histories, she had found something that suggested that the phenomenon predated European settlement. One tape documents this discovery. Claire sounds both excited and deeply frightened. Claire, I found it. I found the reference. In a genealogical record compiled by the Hemlock family in the early 1800s, there is a mention of the area that was later called Hemlock Hollow. The record describes the settlement as a place where the old things still walked. It says that the Hemlock family's patriarch refused to build his homestead in the deepest part of the forest, choosing instead to establish his home on the periphery, on high ground where he could see the forest but did not have to be surrounded by it. She pauses, and there is the sound of pages turning, of her handling documents. Claire. The record also mentions that indigenous peoples had refused to spend extended time in the deep forest, that there were areas they considered sacred or dangerous, depending on the account, that there was a place in the forest that was considered to belong to something that was here before. Those are the exact words used in the record. Her voice becomes quieter. Claire, which means what lives in Hemlock Hollow is not new. It is not something that arrived recently. It has been there for centuries, possibly longer. It predates European settlement. It predates the establishment of the town. It is indigenous to that place in a way that nothing human can ever be. It is not an invader. It is a native inhabitant. Claire's investigation now took a new direction. She began researching indigenous history, looking for records or accounts of what the tribes that inhabited this region might have known about Hemlock Hollow. This was more difficult. The records were sparse, often filtered through the perspectives of settlers and missionaries, rather than the indigenous peoples themselves. But she found fragments, references, stories that had been preserved in oral tradition and had occasionally been written down. One particularly significant discovery came from a document in the State Historical Society's archives. It was a journal entry written by a missionary in the 1830s, describing a conversation he had with an older member of a Cherokee community. The conversation, as recorded by the missionary, mentioned a creature or entity that lived in certain forests, something that took people who ventured into its domain, something that had been there so long that even the oldest stories could not remember when it had arrived. The missionary had dismissed the story as superstition, but he had recorded it nonetheless, and in that record, Claire found confirmation of something she had begun to suspect, that Hemlock Hollow was not unique, that there were other places like it, other forests, other mountains, other areas where something old and hungry had established its domain. A tape Claire made after finding this document is particularly revealing. Claire, the missionary's account mentions that the entity, or creature, or phenomenon was said to prefer isolation. It avoided areas where humans gathered in large numbers. It selected places that were remote, forested, difficult to access. It established boundaries and marked them clearly. It created an arrangement, those were the missionary's words, though he was translating from the Cherokee account, that made the place recognizable as belonging to something other than human settlement. She sounds more certain now, more afraid, but also more certain. Claire, this is not a random phenomenon. This is not a psychological effect or a natural disaster. This is something that deliberately selects locations, that cultivates them, that marks them and defends them, that hunts within their boundaries. Hemlock Hollow is not the only such place, but it is one of them, and it is in an active cycle. It was around this time that Claire began to attract more attention, not from the mysterious man who had visited the county office, but from others, local people, who recognized that she was asking questions, visiting the forest in unusual places, researching the disappearances. They would approach her in coffee shops and local restaurants. They would leave messages on her phone. Some were warnings, some were suggestions to stop, some were simply expressions of fear. One conversation was captured on a tape that Claire made after meeting with an older woman named Dorothy Klein, who had lived in the area her entire life. Dorothy's voice on the tape is thin and elderly, but very clear. Dorothy, my sister disappeared in 1965. She was 16 years old. We searched for a week, and the official search lasted less than 2 days. They said she had probably run away with a boyfriend. But she did not run away. Something took her. I have known that for 58 years, but I could not prove it. Nobody would listen. There is a sound like Dorothy settling into a chair. Dorothy, when you started asking questions, I thought maybe someone was finally going to find out what really happened. But now, I am scared, because the people who took my sister are still here, still taking people. And if you keep asking questions, you might end up the same way. And then nobody will even think to ask what happened to you. Claire's voice. Do you know what took your sister? Do you have any idea what it is, Dorothy? Something that belongs to the forest. Something that eats people. Something that arranges them, arranges what is left of them, in patterns along the boundary. I have seen the patterns. I know what they are. They are markers, territory markers, like an animal would mark its territory. But the markers are made of people, made of what is left. The tape ends after that. By spring, Claire had compiled enough information to understand the basic facts of what was happening in Hemlock Hollow. She had created a detailed record of the phenomenon. She had established that it was not new, not isolated, not an accident. She had done what Dale Harrison had tried to do. She had documented the truth. And then she realized, with a clarity that comes from the understanding of real danger, that she had to leave. One of her final tapes, made in early April, documents this realization. Claire, I have spent 8 months investigating the disappearances in Hemlock Hollow. I have found evidence that the phenomenon is real. I have found evidence that it is not new. I have found evidence that it is deliberate. I have found evidence that it is dangerous. I have found evidence that someone or some institution does not want this information to become public. She sounds tired, worn down by months of fear. Claire, but I have also realized something else. I have realized that I cannot publish this. I cannot make this information public, because doing so would make me a target, not to any human institution, but to the thing itself. Dale Harrison became a target when his investigation got too close, and I will become a target if I push any further. There is a long pause, Claire, so I am going to do something else. I am going to hide my research. I am going to compile all of my tapes, all of my notes, all of my evidence, and I am going to hide it in a place where it will be found. But not immediately, not while the thing in Hemlock Hollow is still active, not while it is still hungry. Maybe in decades, when enough time has passed, when the cycle has changed, when the danger is less acute, someone will find this, and then they will know, and then finally, the truth will be documented. She pauses again. Claire, I am leaving Hemlock Hollow. I am moving away. I am not going to return to the forest. I am not going to continue the investigation. I am simply going to disappear quietly, the way people should when they realize they are in genuine danger. And I hope that, someday, someone else will finish what Dale and I started. Claire Mercer left Hemlock Hollow in late April. She gave notice at the county records office, citing personal reasons. She sold her house, she packed her belongings, and one day, in late April, she drove away from the area and did not return. Her research was never found. Her tapes were never discovered. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist in relation to Hemlock Hollow. She had been there, investigating, asking questions, learning secrets, and then she was gone. But her research had not disappeared entirely, because she had not simply hidden it for the future. She had given copies to someone, a person who would understand its significance and would know what to do with it. That person was Margaret Harrison, Dale's widow. When the county sheriff found Margaret's house in August of that year, it was empty. She had left approximately 3 months earlier, around the same time Claire had departed the area. She had sold the house through a realtor, packed her belongings, and relocated. No forwarding address was provided, no explanation was given. But before she left, Margaret had taken steps to ensure that her husband's recordings would be preserved and eventually discovered. She had made copies of the tapes. She had stored them in multiple locations. She had left instructions with a lawyer regarding how they should be handled after her death. She had, in essence, become a guardian of Dale's legacy. Years later, when researchers and investigators finally began to take the disappearances seriously, when the accumulating evidence became too substantial to ignore, the recordings would be rediscovered. The official narrative of isolated incidents would be questioned. The pattern that Dale had seen would be acknowledged, though never fully explained. But by that time, things in Hemlock Hollow had changed again. The disappearances slowed in the years following Dale and Claire's investigations. The activity cycle seemed to be entering a dormant phase. Months would pass without reports of missing persons. Then a year, then more than a year, people began to relax. The tension that had gripped the area began to dissipate. Hemlock Hollow became just another Appalachian forest, beautiful and remote, but not uniquely dangerous. The official records reflected this. The case files were closed. The active investigation was suspended. The community moved on. Time passed, as it does, and the memory of the disappearances faded into the background of local history. But things were happening in the forest that nobody was documenting. Rangers working in the area during this period reported subtle changes. The boundary markers that Dale had described seemed to be expanding, moving outward, extending the claimed territory. The arrangement of objects along the forest edges seemed to be growing more elaborate, more complex. The structures made of bone and fabric seemed to be multiplying, appearing in new locations. It was as if, in the absence of active investigation and pressure, the thing in Hemlock Hollow was consolidating its power, establishing stronger boundaries, building more elaborate structures, preparing for something. One ranger's personal log, discovered among the archives, documents these observations. The tape is dated September 15th, 10 years after Dale Harrison disappeared. The ranger's name is Michael Torres, and he has been working in the area for 3 years. Michael, I have been trained not to report subjective observations, not to document personal feelings about locations, but I need to make this record because something is changing in the forest, and I do not think anyone else is paying attention. He sounds young, perhaps in his 30s, and there is a careful quality to his voice. The voice of someone choosing words precisely. Michael, the forest is changing, not visibly, not in ways that you could easily measure, but perceptibly. The arrangement of the terrain feels different. The way the trees stand feels different. The boundary between the residential area and the forest proper is becoming more marked, more defined, more intentional. There's a pause. Michael, I found another structure today. Not on the main trails, off-path, in a location that would be difficult to access intentionally. The structure is large, larger than the ones I have seen before. It is constructed from bone and fabric, yes, but there is also metal. Old metal objects, rusted and weathered, incorporated into the framework. It looks like the structure is still being built, like something is still adding to it, like it is not finished. He stops talking. In the background, there is wind, and underneath, that clicking sound, that repetitive, rhythmic tapping. Michael, I can hear it now, the clicking. It is louder than it used to be, or maybe I am just more aware of it. Either way, it is present. It is always present now, not just in the deep forest, but here at the ranger station. I can hear it even when I am inside. It sounds like the thing is everywhere now, or like it is only getting closer. The tape end. Michael Torres continued to work in Hemlock Hollow for another 2 years. Then he transferred to a ranger station in a different state. His reason, officially, was a desire for change, a wanting to work in a different environment. No mention was made of the structures or the clicking sound or the feeling that the forest was becoming something other. His personal recordings were not archived. They simply disappeared. But the thing that Michael had sensed, that he had documented in his tentative and careful way, was correct. Something was changing in Hemlock Hollow. Something was building. Something was preparing. For what? Nobody could say. The dormant cycle lasted 7 years. Then, in the spring of the 11th year after Dale Harrison's disappearance, the disappearances resumed, not in a dramatic way, not with multiple people going missing at once, but consistently. A hiker here, a park ranger there, a person out for an evening walk who did not return. One by one, the forest began to take people again. And this time, the official response was different, because Claire Mercer's research, discovered by historians and genealogists, had begun to circulate. Because Dale Harrison's recordings, finally archived and preserved, had begun to be taken seriously by researchers. Because the accumulating evidence of a pattern, of a centuries-long phenomenon, had become too substantial to ignore, an investigation was initiated, not an official, public investigation, but a quiet, careful examination of the evidence. And the people conducting this investigation found something that Dale and Claire had found. They found that you cannot solve the mystery of Hemlock Hollow from a distance. You cannot uncover its secrets through research alone. You have to go into the forest yourself. You have to see it. You have to experience it. You have to understand it from the inside. And every person who does that risks becoming part of the boundary markers, part of the arrangement, part of the structure that the thing in Hemlock Hollow is building. The final tape in Claire's archive was discovered in 2024, hidden in a storage unit that she had rented 30 years earlier under an assumed name. The tape was mislabeled, filed among documents about local history and genealogy. It was found almost by accident, by someone researching Claire's family background. not looking for information about her investigation. The voice on the tape is Claire's, but she sounds different. Older, though not much older. Changed by time and by what she has learned. The tape was made approximately 15 years after she left Hemlock Hollow. She is not in the forest. She is in some kind of professional office, perhaps a university, perhaps a research facility. The background noise is minimal and does not provide clues to her location. Claire, I am making this recording because I have reached a conclusion. I have spent 15 years away from Hemlock Hollow. I have tried not to think about it. I have tried to build a life that does not involve the disappearances or the phenomenon or any aspect of that place, and I have failed, because the truth does not let you go. Once you know it, once you have documented it, once you have seen the evidence with your own eyes, you cannot unknow it. She takes a breath. Claire, I have been contacted by researchers, by paranormal investigators, by academic institutions interested in the disappearances. They want my information. They want my research. They want to understand what I found. And I have been refusing to help them. I have been refusing because I am afraid. I am afraid of what might happen if I speak publicly about Hemlock Hollow. I am afraid of what the attention might do to the thing that lives there. I am afraid of what it might do in response. There is a long pause. Claire, but I have also realized that my fear is selfish. Dale Harrison died because he tried to tell the truth, and I survived because I ran away. I took his evidence and I hid it, and I left him to be remembered as a crazy ranger who disappeared chasing folklore. That was wrong. That was cowardly, and I need to correct it. Her voice becomes very quiet. Claire, so I am going to speak to the researchers. I am going to share my findings. I am going to contribute to the investigation. And I am going to accept that this might bring consequences. That Hemlock Hollow might decide that I am a threat again. That I might have to return there. That I might have to face what lives in that forest. The tape ends after that. Claire Mercer was found dead in her apartment 3 months later. The official cause of death was heart failure. She was 52 years old. There was no indication of foul play, no signs of trauma. She had simply gone to sleep one night and had not woken up. But those who knew the details of her investigation, who understood what she had learned about Hemlock Hollow, who had listened to her recordings, had a different understanding of what had happened. They understood that she had broken her silence. She had begun to share her research. And the thing in Hemlock Hollow, in response, had reached out and taken her. It was a warning and a confirmation, a demonstration that the phenomenon was not passive, that it was not simply a location where people disappeared, that it was actively aware, that it was actively hunting, that it was actively defending its territory. The investigation into Hemlock Hollow's disappearances continues, though not openly. The official reports still treat each missing person case as an isolated incident. The official stance is still that the forest is simply dangerous and that disappearances are regrettable but random events. But behind the scenes, researchers and investigators who have access to Dale and Claire's evidence know better. They know that something is wrong in Hemlock Hollow. They know that it is old. They know that it is hungry. And they know that it is aware of anyone who tries to understand it. The most recent recordings in the archive come from a researcher named David Huang, who spent 6 months in the area in 2023, attempting to gather data on the phenomenon. His recordings document the final days of his investigation. They document the moment when he realized that he had drawn the attention of the thing he was studying. They document his decision to leave the area and never return. And in his final tape, made from the relative safety of a distance, he provides a warning for anyone who might continue this investigation. David, if you are listening to this, if you have gained access to this archive, if you are considering continuing this research, you need to understand something fundamental. Hemlock Hollow is not a mystery to be solved. It is not a phenomenon to be understood through research and investigation. It is a predator. And the predator knows when it is being hunted. He pauses. David, Dale Harrison died because he investigated too thoroughly. Claire Mercer died because she tried to share what she knew. And I survived only because I stopped investigating. Because I withdrew my attention. Because I became small enough to be ignored. His voice becomes quieter, more urgent. David, if you continue this work, the thing in Hemlock Hollow will know. It will mark you as a threat, and it will hunt you. Not because you have done anything wrong, but because predators eliminate threats. That is what they do. That is their nature. There is a long silence. On the tape, wind. The distant sound of trees moving. David, but I am telling you this because you need to make an informed choice. You need to know what the cost of truth might be, and you need to decide if the truth is worth that cost. Dale thought it was. Claire thought it was. And maybe you will think it is too. Maybe the world needs to know what lives in Hemlock Hollow. Maybe someone needs to finally speak it into existence, no matter what it costs. His voice becomes very quiet. David, but if you do continue this work, if you do try to expose the truth, then understand this. You are not going to survive it. You are not going to leave Hemlock Hollow the way Dale and Claire did. You are going to become part of the boundary markers. You are going to become part of the arrangement. You are going to become part of the thing's territory. The tape ends. The archive was sealed and classified in 2024. Official channels announced that the investigation into the Hemlock Hollow disappearances had been concluded, though no final report was ever published. The disappearances themselves have continued at a steady rate, approximately one every 3 to 4 months. The official explanation remains that the forest is simply dangerous and that people disappear in remote areas. But if you listen to the recordings, if you read the research, if you piece together the evidence that Dale and Claire and David documented, you begin to understand something different. You begin to understand that Hemlock Hollow is not a place where disappearances happen. Hemlock Hollow is a place where something hunts, where something feeds, where something has established its territory and is systematically cultivating it, building it, expanding it, and perhaps most disturbing of all, you begin to understand that it is not finished, that the boundary markers are still expanding, that the structures are still being built, that the thing in Hemlock Hollow is still active, still growing, still preparing for something. The question is not what happened to Dale or Claire or the others who disappeared. The question is what is still happening? What is Hemlock Hollow becoming? And what will it be when it is finally complete? The recording suggests that someone, eventually, will have to answer these questions. Someone will have to continue the investigation, despite the cost, despite the danger, despite the clear evidence that doing so will result in their own disappearance. And the forest, patient and ancient and hungry, is waiting. The Hemlock Hollow Archives, Part 3. The final recordings. Everything that follows is drawn from recordings made between January and March of this year. The voices belong to people whose names have been changed to protect their identities and their families. What you are about to hear is the culmination of what Dale Harrison, Claire Mercer, and David Huang began. It is also a warning about what happens when the investigation finally reaches its conclusion, because there was someone else, someone who listened to all the previous recordings, someone who read all the research, someone who understood, perhaps better than anyone before them, what was actually happening in Hemlock Hollow. And that person made the decision that David Huang had warned against. That person decided that the truth was worth the cost. They were right, and they were wrong, and they are gone. The first of these final recordings comes from a university voicemail, dated January 8th. The voicemail was left for a colleague named Dr. Patricia Morrison, a researcher in anomalous environmental phenomena. The person leaving the message identifies themselves only as S. Dr. Morrison. This is S. I have been trying to reach you about the Hemlock Hollow archive. I have gained access to the complete collection of recordings. I have reviewed all of them. I have studied the research that Dale Harrison and Claire Mercer compiled, and I believe I understand what is actually happening in that forest. I believe I know what the thing is, or at least, I believe I know what it is not. It is not a creature in the conventional sense. It is not an animal or a cryptid or a ghost. What it is far stranger than any of those explanations. And I think you need to know. I think the world needs to know. Can we meet? I would prefer to discuss this in person. Some things should not be discussed over phone lines. The voicemail ends. Dr. Morrison returned the call, and what follows is a series of recordings that document their conversation over the course of the next 2 weeks. The first in-person meeting between Dr. Morrison and S took place in a coffee shop in a town approximately 30 miles from Hemlock Hollow. The recording quality is poor, capturing ambient conversation noise from the coffee shop, but the dialogue is clear. S speaks with a young woman's voice. She sounds educated, articulate, careful in her word choices. S, thank you for meeting with me. I know this is unusual. I know I probably sound paranoid or obsessive or like someone who has developed an unhealthy fixation on a local mystery. And maybe I have, but I think I have found something that changes everything. Dr. Morrison, tell me what you have found. S, I started by looking at the disappearances from a different angle, not as individual incidents, not even as a pattern of predation, but as a collection event. What if the thing in Hemlock Hollow is not hunting for food? What if it is collecting? There is a pause in the recording, the sound of coffee cups being set down. Dr. Morrison, collecting for what purpose? S, that is where it gets strange. I looked at the historical records, all the disappearances going back to the 1880s. 147 confirmed missing persons, 147 people who vanished in or near Hemlock Hollow and were never recovered. And I looked at the structures that Dale and Claire described, the arrangements of clothing, the frameworks made of bone and fabric. She stops talking for a moment. S, what if those are not territorial markers? What if they are something else? What if they are vessels or containers or a kind of structure designed to hold something? Dr. Morrison, you are suggesting that the missing persons are being held, that they are still there in some form? S, not held alive. I do not think that, but their essence or energy or consciousness or whatever you want to call it might be. The indigenous accounts that Claire found mention that the thing in Hemlock Hollow came from somewhere else, that it was not native to this place originally. What if it is imprisoned there? What if the structures that it is building are not markers of territory, but markers of a boundary? What if it is trapped in that forest, and it is building a mechanism to free itself? The recording captures Dr. Morrison's intake of breath, a moment of shock. Dr. Morrison, and the disappearances, S, are the price, the energy required to build the mechanism. 147 people, consumed, integrated into the structures, their essence feeding the construction. And it is almost finished. The structures that Michael Torres documented, the ones that the current rangers are observing, they are the final components. And when it is complete, whatever is trapped in Hemlock Hollow will be released. Dr. Morrison did not dismiss this theory. Instead, she invited S to conduct a more formal investigation. She offered access to research facilities, equipment, and institutional support. She also offered S a way to disappear from public records, to conduct this research safely, away from the attention of whatever was monitoring investigations into Hemlock Hollow. But S refused the offer of safety. Instead, S did something that David Huang had warned was certain to result in death. S decided to go to Hemlock Hollow, to enter the forest itself, to attempt to gather direct evidence of the structures that housed the thing and fed its construction. The tape that documents this decision is painful to listen to. It is Dr. Morrison's voice, recorded after S had made their intentions clear. Dr. Morrison, I told S that going to the forest was suicide, that it was exactly what the thing wanted, that every person who has investigated too closely has ended up disappearing, that this was not a research opportunity. This was a death sentence. And S said something that I will never forget. There is the sound of Dr. Morrison taking a breath, composing herself. Dr. Morrison, S said, someone has to. Someone has to go there and confirm what it is, and document it, and make sure that the truth is preserved even after I am gone. Because if no one goes, if no one confirms, then the official story wins. Then it stays a mystery, and mysteries do not get solved. Mysteries get forgotten, and then it will build its mechanism, and it will free itself, and nobody will even know what it was that was released. Dr. Morrison's voice cracks slightly. Dr. Morrison, I have never met anyone as brave or as foolish as S. I am still not sure which one it was. S went to Hemlock Hollow on January 23rd. She went alone, which was necessary. The thing in the forest could sense groups, could detect organized investigation. But a single person moving quietly, acting as if on a personal hiking trip, might escape notice long enough to gather what evidence was possible. S carried a digital recorder, a camera, a GPS device, and a notebook. She also carried a phone with Dr. Morrison's number on speed dial. The plan was to enter the forest in the early morning, to locate one of the structures, to document it, and to exit by late afternoon. A 5 to 6 hour window, fast enough to avoid prolonged exposure, thorough enough to gather useful data. S made a recording before entering the forest. It is the last recording S ever made, with a calm, rational voice. S, I am about to enter the forest. My GPS is active. My phone has full battery and signal. Dr. Morrison will receive updates from me at scheduled intervals. If I do not check in as planned, a search and rescue operation will be initiated. I understand the risks. I accept them. What I am about to do is necessary. The world needs to know what is building in Hemlock Hollow. I am going to show them. She pauses. S, if something happens to me, if I disappear, if I become part of the boundary markers that Dale Harrison discovered, I want this to be on record. I want the truth to be known. I want people to understand that I made this choice with full awareness of what it might cost, and I want them to understand that it was worth it. The recording ends. S entered the forest at 7:34 in the morning. She followed one of the established trails initially, maintaining a casual pace, the gait of someone taking a pleasant hike. GPS signals were regular, her position updated consistently. Everything was normal. At 8:47, she left the main trail. She took a bearing toward the north, toward the area where Dale Harrison had reported finding the arrangement of old clothing, where Claire Mercer had discovered evidence of structures. She moved slowly, quietly, aware that she was now in the territory where the normal rules began to break down. For 43 minutes, nothing unusual occurred. She made her way through dense forest. She navigated rhododendron thickets. She climbed a steep slope. Her breathing was audible on the recording she was making, a continuous documentation of her physical state and environmental observations. Then, at 9:30, her voice changed. Something in her tone shifted. S. I can hear it now. The clicking. I can hear it very clearly. I am not sure how far away it is, but it is close. Close enough that I can feel it, not just hear it. It is like the sound is coming from inside my head. Like my ears are not receiving it through normal sound transmission, but through some other method. Through the ground, maybe, or through the air itself. There is a longer pause on the tape. When S speaks again, her voice is different, more strained. S, I need to keep moving. I need to find the structure before the feeling gets worse, before the disorientation starts. I can already feel time behaving strangely. My watch says 15 minutes have passed since I left the trail, but it feels like longer. It feels like I have been walking for an hour or more. Another pause. S, That is consistent with what Robert Chen described, what Thomas Hendricks experienced. The time distortion. That means I am getting close to the center of the phenomenon's influence. That means I need to move faster. What follows on the recording is approximately 20 minutes of S moving through the forest. The sound is difficult to interpret. Movement through brush, footsteps on stone and earth, breathing that becomes increasingly labored. And underneath, always, that clicking sound, that rhythmic, repetitive tapping that seems to be getting louder, or perhaps closer, or perhaps more internal. Then, at approximately 9:52, S stops moving. She stops speaking. There is just the ambient sound of the forest, wind and trees, that clicking, her breathing. When she speaks again, it is in a whisper. S, I found it. I found one of the structures. I am about 100 yards away. I can see it through the trees. It is larger than I expected. Oh, much larger. It is not a small arrangement. It is a building. It is an actual structure, as tall as a house, constructed entirely from bone and fabric and metal. And it is beautiful, in the most horrible way. I have ever seen anything be beautiful. There is wonder in her voice now, and fear, yes, but also fascination. S, the fabric is woven with incredible intricacy. The pattern is complex and purposeful. It is like looking at something that someone has spent years crafting, something that they have poured intention into, something that means something. She pauses. S, but the bones are what is truly disturbing. Because I can see that some of them are human. I can see the structure of a rib cage. I can see what might be vertebrae. I can see femurs arranged in a pattern. They are integrated into the framework in a way that suggests they are not random. They are positioned specifically. They are part of the design. Her breathing becomes faster. S, I am going to move closer. I am going to get photographs. I am going to document this before I leave. The clicking sound becomes louder on the recording, more insistent, almost aggressive. What follows is approximately 10 minutes of audio that is profoundly disturbing. It is the sound of S moving through the forest, getting closer to the structure. The clicking becomes louder. S's breathing becomes faster. And underneath, there is another sound, a kind of whispering, or perhaps a rustling, or perhaps voices. The audio quality is poor enough that it is impossible to determine exactly what the sound is. S speaks occasionally, documenting what she is seeing. S, the clothing is woven into the bones, pieces of fabric and fiber integrated into the structure at regular intervals. Some of it looks recent. Some of it looks very old. I am seeing denim, which suggests 20th century clothing. I am seeing wool, which could be much older. I am seeing silk, which is unusual for this region. I am seeing materials that I cannot identify, materials that should not be here. A pause. S, I am close enough now to see details. There are markings on some of the bones, scratches or cuts arranged in patterns, like someone was trying to communicate, like someone was trying to leave a message. Her voice breaks slightly. S, I think the markings are names. I think these are the initials or signatures of the people who were consumed to build this. I think the structure is keeping a record of its materials. The whispering becomes louder. S's breathing becomes almost hyperventilation. S, I need to leave. I need to get out of here right now. Something is wrong. The air is wrong. I cannot think clearly. Everything is feeling dreamlike. I am going to turn around and walk directly back to the trail. But S did not make it back to the trail. What follows on the recording is approximately 5 minutes of audio that documents what happened next. It is chaotic, difficult to interpret, genuinely disturbing to listen to. There are sounds of rapid movement, of branches breaking, of S running, or attempting to run, through the forest. Her breathing becomes panicked. She is trying to speak, but her words are fragmented and incoherent. S, it is following me. It is not a creature. It is not a physical thing. It is like the forest itself is moving, like the trees are reaching, like the air is grabbing, sound of a fall, of S, hitting the ground hard. S, I cannot move. I cannot make my legs work. Something is wrong with my body. My limbs are not responding. It is like the forest is holding me. There is a sound then that is truly horrifying. A sound like wind, but purposeful. Like air being forced through a structure. Like breathing from something very large. The clicking sound becomes almost deafening. S screams. The scream is brief, cut off, like her voice was simply taken away. There is a moment of silence on the recording, just wind and that clicking sound. Then, very faintly, a voice. But it is not S's voice. It is something else. Something that sounds almost like words, but not quite. Something that sounds like language being spoken backwards or inside out, or in a way that human vocal cords were not designed to produce. The recording ends after that. Dr. Morrison received the last GPS update from S at 9:58. The location placed S in the forest, approximately half a mile from the main trail. After 9:58, there were no more updates, no more check-ins, no voice on the phone reporting success or requesting extraction. At 10:30, when S had failed to make the first scheduled check-in, Dr. Morrison contacted the county sheriff. Search and rescue was initiated. A team of 12 searchers, with dogs, with equipment, with the full resources of the county, entered the forest at 11 a.m. They searched until sunset. They found nothing. No sign of S, no indication of distress, no evidence that anyone had been in that area recently. The only thing they found was S's phone, lying on the forest floor approximately 300 yards from where the last GPS signal had originated. The screen was cracked, the battery was dead, but it had recorded audio continuously until the moment of impact. When the phone was examined, authorities discovered that it had recorded everything that happened after S stopped speaking into her original recorder. Everything that had been deleted from the original recording, or that had never been transmitted, was preserved in the phone's automatic backup. What the phone had recorded was never officially released. But copies were made, and some of those copies reached researchers, and some of those copies were preserved in archives. And the audio they contained is the most direct documentation we have of what actually happens when the thing in Hemlock Hollow takes someone. The audio is approximately 2 minutes long. In it, you can hear S's breathing change. You can hear the clicking sound become deafening. You can hear sounds that might be wind, or might be the thing moving, or might be S's own consciousness fragmenting as the forest takes her. And you can hear, at the end, a final message. Words that S managed to speak, even as everything was being taken from her. S, I am still here. I am being incorporated. I am becoming part of the structure. I can feel it. I can feel my consciousness being woven into the framework. This is not death. This is transformation. This is integration. I am becoming part of something larger than myself, and it is terrible and beautiful, and I cannot stop it. Her voice becomes fainter. S, tell them the truth. Tell them what it is. Tell them that it is not a creature that hunts. It is a creature that creates. It is a creature that builds. It is using us as materials to construct something, a mechanism, a gate, a doorway. And when it is finished, when enough of us have been woven into the framework, when enough of our essence has been integrated into the structure, it will open. The sound becomes a kind of tearing noise, or perhaps the fabric of reality itself breaking. And when it opens, everything changes. The recording ends. S's body was never found. The search was called off after 10 days. The official report stated that S had become lost, had likely suffered a fall or injury, and had perished in the forest. Her remains would not be recovered in that terrain. Her family was offered sympathy and closure and a flag and a memorial service. No mention was made of the recordings. No mention was made of the phone's backup data. No mention was made of what S had discovered or what S had heard as she was being taken. The official narrative was maintained. Hemlock Hollow remained simply a dangerous forest where people sometimes disappeared. But Dr. Morrison knew the truth, and Dr. Morrison made a decision. Dr. Morrison's voice appears on only one recording. It was made approximately 2 weeks after S disappeared, and it was meant to be a summary, a final documentation, a closing of the archive that Dale Harrison and Claire Mercer had begun. Dr. Morrison, I have compiled all of the information, all the recordings from Dale Harrison and Claire Mercer and David Huang and S. I have analyzed the patterns. I have reviewed the historical data. I have listened to the final audio of what happened when S was taken, and I have reached a conclusion that I did not want to reach. She pauses. When she speaks again, her voice is very controlled. Dr. Morrison, the thing in Hemlock Hollow is not going to stop. It is not going to be captured or studied or understood. It is going to continue its work. It is going to continue collecting people. It is going to continue building its structure. And eventually, it is going to finish. It is going to open the gate that S described. It is going to cross whatever threshold it has been trapped behind. There is a sound like Dr. Morrison sitting down, settling into a chair. Dr. Morrison. And when it does, when that structure is complete and the mechanism activates, it will not stay in Hemlock Hollow. It will spread. It will move outward. It will find other forests, other remote places, other locations where the boundary between the human world and something else is thin. And it will begin construction in those places too. It will build its gates. It will gather its materials. It will create its network. She stops talking for a moment. Dr. Morrison, S was right. It is not a creature that hunts for food. It is a creature that builds. It is a creature that is preparing the world for something. And we have documentation of only one instance of its work. Only one gate. Only one location where the mechanism is being constructed. Her voice becomes quieter. Dr. Morrison, there are other places. I am certain of it. Other forests where people have disappeared in patterns that nobody has connected. Other locations where the official explanation does not match the evidence. Other sites where something is being built. The tape ends after that. Dr. Morrison's research was published in limited academic circles in 2024. She detailed the pattern of disappearances in Hemlock Hollow. She presented the theory of the mechanism. She offered evidence of similar patterns in other locations. Researchers who read her work were skeptical, but intrigued. Investigation began in other areas, but Dr. Morrison did not continue the work. She took a position at a university far from Hemlock Hollow. She published no further papers on the topic. She refused interviews. She essentially disappeared from the research community. When questioned about her withdrawal, she offered no explanation. She simply said that she had found what she was looking for and had decided that some mysteries were better left unsolved. The final recording in the complete archive was made very recently. It was created by someone who was present at the location where S's phone was recovered, a search and rescue volunteer named James Everett, who participated in the search for S and who has worked rescue operations in Hemlock Hollow for the past 8 years. James's voice is calm, but there is something underneath it, a quality of someone speaking from a place of profound regret. James, I found the body, not officially, not as part of the sanctioned search, but later. After the official search was called off, I went back, because something about that day did not sit right with me. Something about the lack of any physical evidence. It did not make sense that a person could disappear so completely. There is wind in the background of the recording. He is in the forest. James, I followed the GPS coordinates from S's last signal. I went to the location where her phone was found. And I kept walking. I kept going deeper into the forest. And I found it. His voice breaks slightly. James, I found the structure that S described. I found the building made of bone and fabric and metal. It is real. It is absolutely real. And S is part of it. I could see her. Not her body, but elements of her integrated into the framework, her clothing woven into the structure. And when I looked closely, I could see her face, or part of her face, preserved somehow in the construction, looking out, looking at me. He pauses for a long time. James, the structure is not finished. There is still construction happening. There are materials being added. And I realized that S was right about one thing. This is not death. This is not an ending. This is a transformation. S is still aware. S is still conscious somehow, in some form that I cannot understand. And S is part of something much larger than an individual human being. There is a sound like James moving, backing away from something. James, I did not report the structure. I did not take photographs. I did not tell anyone what I found. Because I understood in that moment what Dale Harrison understood, what Claire Mercer understood, what S understood. That this is not a mystery that should be solved. This is not a phenomenon that should be studied. This is a natural law that should be left alone. His voice becomes very quiet. James, but I also understood something else. That the structure is nearly finished. That the gate is almost open. That whatever S said would happen when the mechanism was complete is going to happen very soon. And there is nothing anyone can do to stop it. The tape ends with James walking back through the forest. His footsteps fade into the distance. Then there is only wind and the sound of trees and, very faintly, that clicking, that tapping, that rhythm that continues endlessly, marking time toward an ending that no one can prevent. This is where the archive ends. There are no more recordings after James's, no more updates, no more documentation. The researchers who have gained access to the complete collection have moved on to other projects. Dr. Morrison has published no further work. The official investigation into Hemlock Hollow's disappearances has been declared concluded, with no definitive answers. But if you go to Hemlock Hollow now, if you stand at the edge of the forest and listen carefully, you will hear it. That clicking, that rhythmic tapping, that sound that suggests something is still building, something is still constructing, something is still growing toward completion. The structure is nearly finished. The mechanism is nearly ready. And in Hemlock Hollow, and in other forests like it, in other remote places where the boundary is thin, the gate is preparing to open. People still go missing. Not every day, not every week, but regularly enough that the pattern continues, even though no one is documenting it, even though no one is investigating it, even though the official story remains that the forest is simply dangerous, and sometimes people do not come home. The disappearances are not random. They are not accidents. They are not tragedies of bad luck or poor decisions. They are collection. They are construction. They are the price of something being built. And the most disturbing part, the part that none of the researchers could document because none of them survived to examine it, is this. The thing in Hemlock Hollow is not evil. It does not hunt from malice. It does not kill because it is a predator. It takes people because it needs them. Because we are the material it requires. Because human consciousness, human awareness, human essence is the fuel that powers the mechanism it is building. We are not victims. We are resources. And the forest is simply harvesting what it needs to finish its work. The gate is nearly open. The mechanism is nearly complete. And when it activates, when the structure reaches its final configuration, when enough of us have been woven into the framework, everything will change. What will come through when the gate opens, we do not know. What the intention is, we cannot guess. What happens to the world on the other side of that opening, we can only fear. But it is coming. And Hemlock Hollow is just one location, one gate, one mechanism among many that are being built in forests and mountains and wild places across the country, across the world. Dale Harrison tried to warn us. Claire Mercer tried to tell us. David Huang tried to explain it. And S gave everything to document it. And nothing changed. The official explanation remained unchanged. The disappearances continued unnoticed. the mechanism continued its construction. The archive you have just heard is the most complete documentation that exists of what is happening in Hemlock Hollow. It is also the most useless, because knowing the truth does not stop it. Understanding the pattern does not prevent it. Documentation does not save anyone. All it does is ensure that when the gate finally opens, when the thing from the other side finally emerges, we will at least have a record of how it happened. We will at least know that we knew, that we tried, that we failed. The forest is still hungry. The structure is still being built, and the clicking continues, that endless rhythmic tapping, marking time toward an ending that is not an ending at all, but a beginning. Somewhere in Hemlock Hollow, in a clearing surrounded by hemlock trees, a structure stands. It is nearly complete, and within it, woven into its framework, integrated into its essence, the consciousness of 152 people exists in a state that is neither life nor death, but something in between. They are still aware. They are still watching. They are still, in a way that should be impossible, still here. And they are waiting for the gate to open. They are waiting for the mechanism to activate. They are waiting to see what comes through. The archive ends. The recordings stop. But the construction continues. In Hemlock Hollow, the forest is still listening, and the thing that lives there is still building. The mystery is not solved. It never will be, because some questions do not have answers. Some problems do not have solutions. Some doors, once you know they exist, should never be opened, but they will be, because the mechanism is almost complete, and the gate is almost ready. Listen carefully. In the quiet moments, in the places where the forest presses close, you might hear it. That clicking, that tapping, that rhythm of something being built. That is the sound of the mechanism. That is the sound of the gate preparing to open. That is the sound of something very old waking up after a very long sleep. And it is getting louder. Every single day, it gets louder. Story 2. Project Greenbrier. Leaked documents detailing a government search for ancient subterranean folkloric predators. In March of 2019, a series of encrypted files appeared on a secure data-sharing platform used by journalists and independent researchers. The documents were not immediately recognizable for what they were. They contained no official seals, no letterhead, and no classified markings that would later become famous. What they contained instead was a trail, a path that led backwards through decades of unexplained disappearances, government land acquisitions, and carefully buried incident reports. What follows is presented in a case-file documentary style, reconstructed from those leaked materials, cross-referenced interviews, and the pattern of official silence that has surrounded this entire affair. The story begins not in the present, but in the past. Not with technology or bureaucracy, but with something much older, something that lives in the spaces between recorded history and the folklore that survived when recording stopped. Most people know folklore as stories, campfire tales, warnings told to children to keep them close to home. But in certain mountain regions across the American West, in the deep forests of Appalachia, and in scattered communities throughout Canada, folklore was understood differently. It was not entertainment, it was documentation. It was the accumulated memory of communities passing down warnings about something that lived beneath them, something that hunted. The old stories called them many names. The Stonewalkers, the Below Things, the Pale Diggers. The names changed depending on which region you were researching, but the descriptions remained consistent across thousands of miles and centuries of oral tradition. Bipedal creatures, subterranean dwelling, pale or translucent skin, adapted to darkness, nocturnal hunting patterns, a particular preference for isolated travelers and people who ventured into caves or deep forest at night. The folklore suggested they were not common. They were rare. Perhaps geographically isolated populations. perhaps an evolutionary dead end of the human species that never came to light. The United States government did not initially seem to care about folklore, but in 1971, that began to change. A geologist named Dr. Raymond Hollis was contracted by the Department of Interior to conduct a survey of cave systems in the Appalachian region. The purpose was officially listed as Mineral and Water Resources Assessment. His preliminary reports were filed, documented, and filed away in standard geological archives. But in 1973, 6 months after completing his survey, Dr. Hollis was brought into a different kind of meeting. The meeting was not listed in any official calendar. The attendees were not recorded in any public database. But Dr. Hollis's private journals, which were included in the leaked documents, described what was said to him that day. The summary was brief. The government had noticed patterns in disappearance cases across rural areas of high cave density. The patterns were odd. They were too old to be serial killers. They were too geographically dispersed to be accidental, and they correlated almost perfectly with folkloric accounts from indigenous peoples and early settlers. The question was simple. Was there anything in his geological survey that suggested the possibility of a subterranean ecosystem? A place where creatures might live, reproduce, and hunt? Dr. Hollis's answer was yes, not metaphorically, literally yes. The cave systems he had surveyed were far more extensive than surface maps suggested. There were passages that connected across state lines, vast chambers that had never been documented by the spelunking community, evidence of water sources, mineral deposits, and ecological niches that could support a small population of large vertebrates. It was possible. Theoretically, it was possible. 3 months later, Project Greenbrier was established. The leaked documents describe the project's scope as limited, focused, and compartmentalized, which meant, in practice, that it was sprawling, consuming enormous resources, and deliberately fragmented so that no single person, except the project head, would understand the full picture. The primary goal was simple: determine whether folkloric accounts of subterranean predatory creatures reflected a biological reality, and if so, assess the threat level to American citizens. The secondary goals were less reassuring. They involved containment, silencing, and the acquisition of specific geographic regions where such creatures might exist. The first phase of Greenbrier began in 1974. Survey teams were established, ostensibly to assess mineral deposits and water resources in mountainous regions across 12 states. The teams were given special equipment, not the standard geological equipment that a normal survey would use, but items designed to detect movement in darkness, to record audio in caves, to collect biological samples from water sources and cave mud. They were told they were part of a classified environmental assessment. Most team members never knew the real purpose of their work, but one did. Among the leaked documents was a memorandum from a team supervisor named Marcus Webb. Webb had been assigned to lead a survey team in eastern Kentucky in the summer of 1975. His memo, dated August of that year, began matter-of-factly. It described the survey procedures, the locations covered, the samples collected. But 3 paragraphs into the document, the tone changed. Webb wrote that on June 23, 1975, at approximately 11:47 p.m., his team had been setting up monitoring equipment in a cave system near the town of Harlan when they heard something, a sound that did not match any animal they could identify. It was not a bear, not a mountain lion, not a human. The sound was prolonged, multiple pitches, as if something were vocalizing at a frequency and pattern that nothing in the documented animal kingdom produced. Webb's team retreated immediately, but Webb stayed behind. For reasons that were not explained in the memo, Marcus Webb went deeper into the cave. What he found in the darkness of that cave system, Webb wrote, was the most significant discovery of his career and the most terrifying moment of his life. The memo does not describe what he saw in detail. It only states that he collected physical evidence and that the evidence matched no known species in the biological database he was given access to. The memo ends with a simple sentence: "I understand now why the project exists. I understand why silence is necessary. Marcus Webb was offered a choice after that night. He could sign additional confidentiality agreements, be given a substantial financial settlement, and continue his work with Project Greenbrier with full knowledge of its true purpose. Or he could walk away, take the money, and maintain complete silence for the rest of his life. Webb chose the first option, but the leaked documents suggest that choice haunted him. The next significant entry in the Greenbrier files comes from 1977. By that time, survey teams across multiple states had reported similar findings. Audio recordings of unidentified vocalizations in cave systems, physical evidence that did not match cataloged species, traces of movement in areas where no tracked animals should exist, disappearances of hikers and explorers that correlated suspiciously with areas of high cave density. The government's response was strategic. The Department of Interior began quietly purchasing property in regions of Greenbrier activity. Small parcels at first, isolated tracts of mountain land with significant cave systems. The purchases were made through shell corporations and private land trusts so that the true ownership remained obscured. Simultaneously, certain cave systems were declared off-limits to the public. Official reasons varied: environmental protection, unstable geology, cultural site designation for indigenous communities. But the pattern was consistent. Any region where Greenbrier had documented evidence of subterranean activity was systematically sealed off from civilian access. It was also around this time that the project shifted from mere observation to something more active. The leaked documents include field reports from what was termed Interaction Protocol Alpha. The details are sparse, but the implications are clear. Government operatives were setting traps, not lethal traps, the documents state, but devices designed to capture specimens alive: nets, tranquilizer systems, containment vehicles. The plans were drawn up by veterinarians and wildlife specialists. The goal was to capture one of the creatures alive so that it could be studied, its biology understood, its threat level assessed at a level beyond merely circumstantial evidence and folklore. The traps were deployed beginning in 1978 across 4 mountain regions. Each deployment was a failure. The devices were triggered, but nothing was captured. What was captured instead was evidence of intelligence. The creatures, whatever they were, understood the purpose of the traps. They avoided them, or worse, they dismantled them. Physical evidence showed that the equipment had been deliberately destroyed, not accidentally damaged. One incident report, filed by a ranger named Patricia Summers in 1979, described finding a tranquilizer dart in a cave near the Wyoming border. The dart had been used, but not on an animal. The syringe contained a modification. The dosage had been altered, reduced to a level that would not tranquilize a large creature, but only enough to sicken a human. The implication was immediate and unsettling. Whatever had taken that dart had the knowledge to understand its purpose. It had the dexterity to modify it, and it had the capacity to think in terms of payback. The government's response to this discovery was to immediately halt the capture protocols. No more traps. No more attempts at physical containment. The project shifted instead to pure surveillance and documentation. But by then, something had changed in the relationship between the hunters and the hunted. In the early months of 1980, disappearances in Greenbrier-monitored regions began to accelerate. Not dramatically. The numbers remained small enough that they would not trigger widespread alarm, but they were consistent. Someone would disappear from a hiking trail. A ranger would not report for a shift. A park worker would be found abandoned at their vehicle, with no explanation for what had happened or where they had gone. The pattern was disturbing because it suggested that the creatures were no longer merely hunting opportunistically. They were hunting deliberately, and they seemed to have developed a particular interest in the government operatives who were surveilling them. A memo from Project Greenbrier director Dr. Helena Voss, dated April 1980, contained language that suggested a growing fear within the project's leadership. Voss wrote, that the creatures appeared to be learning from the surveillance activities. They seemed to understand where the equipment was placed. They avoided it. More disturbing, they seemed to be targeting the equipment operators. Voss used the phrase coordinated predation strategy and added that this level of cognitive sophistication was impossible if the creatures were simply animals operating on instinct alone. Something else was happening, something that suggested the creatures were not merely reacting to the government's presence, but actively responding to it, learning from it, adapting to it. By 1981, Project Greenbrier had become something different from what it had originally been. It was no longer a survey project. It had evolved into a containment operation. The sealed-off caves and protected lands were no longer simply environmental precautions. They were cages. The entire region was being managed as a kind of open-air prison designed to keep the creatures within established boundaries and keep the civilian population outside those boundaries. But prisons, by their nature, are imperfect. The leaked documents include incident reports from a dozen different breaches, cases where creatures were sighted outside the official Greenbrier zones. A hitchhiker near the Oregon border reported picking up a passenger who got out of the car miles from any established cave system, then disappeared when the driver looked away from the road. A park ranger in Colorado filed a report of finding human remains in a location that showed signs of predation that did not match any known apex predator. A dispatcher in West Virginia received a 911 call from someone claiming to be trapped underground with things that used to be people. Most of these reports were investigated, documented, and then filed away. But they paint a consistent picture. The creatures were not remaining contained. The system was failing, and the government knew it was failing. One of the most significant documents in the leaked cache comes from 1983. It is a memo from the Project Greenbrier Oversight Committee to the director of the FBI. The memo is classified and heavily redacted, but enough remains visible to understand its message. It states that the organization has reached the conclusion that extermination is no longer feasible. The creatures are too widespread. The cave systems are too extensive. The cost in terms of manpower, resources, and potential civilian exposure would be catastrophic. Instead, the memo recommends a policy of strategic containment and information control, which meant, in plain language, accepting that the creatures existed, accepting that they would continue to hunt and kill, and ensuring that the public never found out about it. The strategy that followed was elegant in its brutality. First, any disappearance that might be linked to the creatures was reclassified as a crime or accident. Serial killers were blamed for crimes that the creatures had committed. Hikers were listed as lost and presumed dead through exposure or misadventure. Wildlife attacks were blamed on bears or mountain lions. The official record was carefully curated so that no pattern would emerge from the statistics. Second, the Greenbrier zones were expanded and more aggressively protected. Eminent domain seizures were undertaken. Private property was confiscated under environmental protection laws. Homeowners were forced out, often with minimal compensation and significant legal obstruction if they tried to fight back. The zone of control grew, but the creatures did not cooperate with the plan. By the late 1980s, the incidents were increasing in frequency again. The breaches were becoming more violent. The creatures were no longer simply hunting solitary individuals. They were becoming aggressive toward larger groups. Hikers found mutilated in areas that should have been safe. Search and rescue teams that never reported in. Park rangers who were discovered with their camp destroyed and themselves gone, leaving only blood and unanswered questions behind. A field report from 1989 describes a particularly disturbing incident in a national forest in Oregon. A family of 4 had been camping in what was officially a safe zone, though they did not know that the safety designation was based on careful zoning to keep them away from the creatures' known territories. During the night, something had approached the camp. The tent had been torn open, The family's vehicle had been found miles away, completely gutted. The bodies, what remained of them, were discovered over the course of 3 days by a search team. The official report listed the incident as a bear attack. The coroner signed off on this assessment despite evidence that the damage patterns did not match any known bear attack in the region. One of the searchers who found the family, a man named David Chen, wrote a personal letter that was included in the leaked documents. In the letter, Chen describes what he actually saw: the precision of the injuries, the arrangement of the remains, the evidence of something that was not hunting for food, but hunting for sport, or from hatred, or from some emotion that Chen could not name. He describes the terror he felt, knowing that he had been searching through a forest where something intelligent and malevolent was aware of his presence. He describes the experience of passing within feet of the creature's previous kills, not knowing what he was walking through. Chen's letter ends with a simple statement: "I quit the next day. I told them I was moving back to the city. They seemed relieved." The 1990s represented a shift in the Greenbrier Project's documentation style. By that point, the organization had accepted that it was managing an ongoing catastrophe rather than solving a problem. The reports became more clinical, more focused on damage control and statistics. How many disappearances could be safely attributed to other causes? How large could the containment zone become before it provoked questions from Congress? How could the organization continue to exist and be funded without revealing its true purpose? But embedded within these clinical reports are the occasional personal notes, memos from field operatives who could not quite maintain the detached tone of bureaucracy, mentions of sounds heard in the dark, descriptions of equipment that would malfunction in ways that suggested tampering, references to morale problems among staff because people started to realize what they were actually guarding. A memo from 1994 contains a particularly chilling detail. It notes that creatures had been observed deliberately placing the remains of their kills at the boundary of Greenbrier zones, not scattered randomly, but arranged, positioned as if they were messages. The memo does not speculate on what the message was, but the author of the memo clearly understood its implication. The creatures were communicating. They were not simply predators following their nature. They were intelligent entities that were deliberately telling the government something through the language of corpses at zone boundaries. By the end of the 1990s, Project Greenbrier had become a ghost operation. Its budget was hidden within larger Department of Interior appropriations. Its staff had been reduced to a core group of operatives and researchers who understood what they were protecting and why. Public awareness had been eliminated. The folklore that had originally alerted the government to the creature's existence had faded into the category of campfire stories, no longer taken seriously by most people because official culture had declared it to be impossible. And then, in the late 1990s, something changed again. The creatures stopped hunting outside the zones entirely. The breaches halted. The disappearances that might have been linked to them ceased. The creatures appeared to have consolidated within their territories. This could have been interpreted as success. The containment was working. The creatures had accepted their boundaries and were remaining within them. But the Greenbrier documents suggest that the organization understood what was actually happening. The creatures were waiting. They were preparing for something. The field operatives posted in the Greenbrier zones began to report signs of increased activity within the containment regions. Vocalizations were becoming more frequent and more complex. The creatures seemed to be gathering, congregating in certain areas, engaging in behaviors that suggested organization and purpose. One report from 2001 uses the term population surge. Another, from 2003, suggests coordinated breeding cycle. The implications were clear to the project leadership. Whatever the creatures had been doing during the years of hunting and adaptation, they were now doing something else. They were increasing their numbers. They were preparing. Preparing for what? The documents do not explicitly say, but scattered through the later reports are troubling references. mentions of ancient folklore, suggesting that the creatures emerged from underground periodically. Stories about cyclical behavior spanning centuries, references to astronomical events and seasonal triggers. One particularly cryptic memo from 2005 contains a single sentence: "If the patterns repeat, emergence will be possible by 2015 to 2020. The leaked documents trail off after that. The most recent entries are from 2009 and contain no specific revelations. They are focused on operational security, budget allocation, and the maintenance of the cover story. But they make one thing clear. The organization believed that something was coming, that the creatures were not permanently constrained by geography and government policy, that they were simply being held in check until whatever trigger was supposed to cause them to emerge would finally arrive." Which brings us to the present moment. The documents were leaked in March 2019, just as the calendar window that the 2005 memo suggested was opening. Whether this was intentional exposure or accidental disclosure has never been determined. The organizations involved have never commented. The government has never acknowledged the existence of Project Greenbrier, let alone confirmed or denied its findings. But certain facts remain verifiable and disturbing. The land acquisitions that the Greenbrier project began in the 1970s are still held by shell corporations and government agencies, still legally protected from civilian access, still maintained at significant expense, despite no official explanation for their purpose. The disappearances in Greenbrier-adjacent areas have never ceased. They have simply been reclassified and scattered across so many different official explanations that no pattern emerges. New hiking trails have been closed in recent years, with increasingly vague official reasons. Park ranger positions in certain regions have seen increased turnover and fewer applicants, suggesting that people who work in those areas are keeping the jobs brief and sharing negative experiences with others. And something else is happening. In the past few years, spelunking and caving forums have begun reporting increased sightings in cave systems throughout the Appalachian region and parts of the Rocky Mountains. Experienced cavers describe finding caves that seem to have been deliberately blocked. They mention finding equipment in cave systems that appears to be government issue, abandoned and rusted from years of exposure. They report finding the remains of animals in positions and states that do not match natural death. They describe hearing sounds deep in the earth that do not match any cataloged cave acoustics. Some cavers have reported that their equipment malfunctions in specific caves in ways that suggest electromagnetic interference, as if something is being deliberately shielded from detection. And then there are the anecdotal reports from hikers, park rangers, and outdoor enthusiasts. Stories told in forums and online communities. Accounts of things seen at the edges of vision in deep forests. Sounds that do not match the catalogued nocturnal wildlife of those regions. Encounters with people who do not seem entirely human, who emerge from caves or wooded areas and disappear again, leaving no trace. The stories have a consistency to them, despite coming from sources that should have no connection to each other. The same descriptions of pallid skin, of movement that seems to defy normal physics, of an emanating sense of wrongness that no amount of rationality can explain away. The question that the leaked Greenbrier documents ultimately force us to confront is simple. What happens when a government has successfully contained a threat, has successfully hidden it from public knowledge, but has failed to eliminate it? What happens when the threat continues to exist, continues to grow, continues to learn and adapt? And what happens when the mechanisms of containment begin to fail? The answer, based on everything documented in the Project Greenbrier files, is that no one knows, because the government has never developed a contingency for the scenario where the creatures successfully breach the outer perimeter of the containment zones. where they spread into areas where the cover story cannot be maintained, where the public discovers what has been hidden from them for decades. If such a scenario occurs, the documents suggest it will unfold rapidly and catastrophically. The official agencies involved have never trained the public to understand what they are encountering, because the official position has always been that such creatures do not exist. There will be panic. There will be disbelief. There will be a period of confusion while the government continues to deny, while the media tries to understand, while independent researchers attempt to corroborate evidence that official sources categorically deny. In that confusion, the creatures will hunt. The final document in the leaked Greenbrier cache is a memo dated 2008 from an unknown author to an unknown recipient. It contains no official letterhead or identifying information. It appears to have been written off the record, perhaps as a personal reflection from someone who understood the full scope of what the organization was attempting to manage. The memo is brief. It reads as follows: "We built a cage for something we do not fully understand. We told ourselves that the cage would hold. We told ourselves that the threat would remain contained. We told ourselves that the problem would solve itself, or that we would find a solution before the problem became unsolvable. We did not tell ourselves the truth. The truth is that we are guarding a catastrophe. We are managing a disaster. We are working every day to prevent a breakdown that we have no capacity to prevent. The only variable we control is time. The only thing we are doing is delaying. When the delay ends, when the cage is finally breached, when the creatures emerge into the world that we have hidden them from, there will be consequences. Consequences that the people of this country will face without warning, without preparation, without understanding of what they are encountering. That is the only legacy of Project Greenbrier. We have not solved the problem. We have only postponed it. And we have ensured that when the reckoning finally comes, it will be catastrophic. The memo is not signed. It has never been officially acknowledged. And outside of the circles of people who were given access to the leaked documents, few people even know it exists. But it remains the most honest assessment of what Project Greenbrier has accomplished. It remains a warning that was written years ago and has gone largely unheeded because the threat it describes remains theoretical, remains hidden, remains denied. For now, the creatures have not emerged. The containment is still holding. The folklore has faded further into irrelevance. In a world where most people do not spend time in deep forests or cave systems, the government continues its work in silence, maintaining the zones, managing the disappearances, keeping the secret that sits beneath the earth. And life continues as if nothing is wrong, as if nothing is waiting, as if there is no clock counting down toward a moment that no one wants to acknowledge is coming. But in certain mountain regions, in the deep forests where cave systems honeycomb the earth, if you listen carefully at night, you might hear something. You might hear sounds that do not quite match anything your mind can categorize. You might hear what the indigenous peoples called the voice of the below things. You might hear the creatures moving beneath the thin layer of soil and stone that separates us from whatever exists below. You might hear them waiting. You might hear them preparing. You might hear them communicating in frequencies and patterns that humans are not meant to understand but cannot help but sense in the deep reptilian part of the brain that remembers when we were not the dominant species, when things lived below us, when the world was far stranger than the official histories admit. And if you hear that sound, you might remember that folklore is not fiction. It is not entertainment. It is the accumulated memory of people passing down warnings about things that lived alongside our ancestors, things that we have not eliminated, things that we have only contained, things that, according to the classified documents that were leaked into the world, will not remain contained forever. Project Greenbrier still exists. The creatures still wait. The government still maintains its silence. And somewhere in the darkness beneath the mountains, something continues to grow.